lousy rooms to great rooms. And so it wasn't just the public just think, oh, you were only together 5 years, we've only got 5 million.
In the complicated world of rock and roll history, John Lennon stood out as someone who spoke his mind without holding back. The Beatles member turned peace activist wasn't just a groundbreaking songwriter who helped change popular music forever. He was also brutally honest about other musicians in ways that created lasting bad feelings throughout his career. Lennon was the Liverpool legend behind songs like Imagine and movies like A Hard Day's Night. He was famous for making sharp, cutting comments and having very high standards that left several major artists with hurt feelings. He once said he believed in everything until someone proved it wrong, including fairies, myths, and dragons, because it all exists, even if it's just in your mind. Unfortunately for some musicians, his belief in their talent was much more limited. From fights backstage to devastating public insults, Lennon's battles with other artists showed a man who valued being real and authentic more than being polite. Some of these fights happened during famous interviews, while others grew worse over years of professional competition. All of them show the demanding perfectionist behind the peace symbol. These stories reveal the harsh reality of 6 musicians who discovered that crossing John Lennon meant facing one of music's sharpest critics. Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones frontman, was one musician who became the target of John Lennon's class-conscious criticism. The tension between these British rock stars went far beyond the famous Beatles versus Stones rivalry that dominated music magazines in the 1960s. The conflict came from Lennon's belief that Jagger was a fake rebel. According to Beatles biographer Philip Norman, Lennon privately told people that Jagger was a middle-class kid from Dartford who was pretending to be a dangerous blues musician. He thought Jagger's rebellious image was carefully planned rather than genuine. What bothered Lennon wasn't just Jagger's background, but what he saw as fake authenticity. While Lennon came from real working-class struggles in Liverpool, he saw Jagger's bad boy image as what he called posh boy rebellion. He believed it was designed for maximum commercial impact without any real risk. Lennon allegedly told Melody Maker magazine in 1970 that some people are born rebels, while others just play them on television. He didn't name anyone specifically, but he was clearly talking about the Stones' carefully created image. People in the music industry knew exactly who he meant. The rivalry got worse during the late 1960s, when both bands were trying different musical styles. At a London party in 1969, witnesses said Lennon openly made fun of Jagger's stage moves. He reportedly told other guests to watch Jagger practice being dangerous in the mirror before every show. Despite public politeness between the bands, Lennon never changed his private opinion of Jagger. He continued to see him as someone who had created fake rebel credentials just to make money. Elvis Presley, the king who lost his way. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was another musician whose later career reportedly disgusted John Lennon so much that he spoke out publicly against him. The conflict between these two rock legends showed a generational clash about artistic integrity versus commercial success. The tension started in the late 1960s when Elvis was performing in Las Vegas, while Lennon was pushing musical boundaries with experimental albums. According to music journalist Ray Coleman, Lennon privately called Elvis a revolutionary who sold his soul to Colonel Parker and became everything rock and roll was supposed to destroy. What made Lennon angry wasn't Elvis's early influence, which he admitted was important, but his transformation into what Lennon saw as establishment entertainment. While Lennon was risking his career with controversial political statements and avant-garde music, Elvis was playing it safe with what John called neutered rock for middle-aged tourists in rhinestone jumpsuits. Lennon told Rolling Stone magazine in 1970 that he had nothing personal against Elvis, but Elvis could have been their greatest, and he just stopped trying. He compared Elvis to someone who won the lottery and decided to spend it all on hamburgers. The disappointment reached its peak when Elvis met President Nixon in 1970 and received a federal narcotics badge while publicly supporting anti-drug efforts. Lennon reportedly told friends this was the final betrayal of everything rock and roll once represented. Despite acknowledging Elvis's foundational importance to rock music, Lennon never forgave what he saw as the king's abandonment of rock's rebellious spirit for comfortable conformity. Paul McCartney and Wings, The Most Personal Attack, Wings and Paul McCartney's solo career became the target of John Lennon's most personal and brutal musical criticism. The conflict between these former songwriting partners represented one of music's most painful public divorces. The tension exploded after the Beatles breakup when McCartney formed Wings and began releasing what Lennon saw as lightweight pop music. According to Beatles historian Mark Lewison, Lennon privately told people that Wings was Paul's desperate attempt to prove he didn't need the rest of them. But all he was proving was that he never understood what made the Beatles great. What bothered Lennon wasn't just the music itself, but what it represented about their partnership's end. While Lennon was exploring experimental sounds with Yoko Ono and tackling serious political themes, McCartney was achieving commercial success with what John called elevator music disguised as rock and roll. In a 1980 Playboy interview, Lennon delivered one of his most cutting public assessments. He said Paul's problem was that he thinks a good hook makes a good song. Paul can write melodies, but he never learned to write truthfully. The rivalry reached its peak during the mid-1970s when Wings was dominating the charts while Lennon was going through his lost weekend period. At industry events, witnesses said Lennon would visibly cringe when Wings songs played. He reportedly told companions to listen to that production because it was like they were trying to make music for shopping malls. Despite their later attempts to reconcile, Lennon's assessment of McCartney's solo work remained harsh. He viewed it as proof that commercial success had replaced artistic integrity. The Monkees. Everything wrong with the music industry. The Monkees, the manufactured television band, became symbols of everything John Lennon despised about the music industry's commercialization. His hatred for the group went far beyond typical rock snobbery and struck at his core beliefs about artistic authenticity. The conflict began in 1966 when the Monkees were created as a television response to the Beatles' success in A Hard Day's Night. According to music journalist Nick Cohn, Lennon privately referred to them as four actors pretending to be musicians while real artists starved. He saw their success as proof that the industry valued marketing over talent. What made Lennon furious wasn't just their manufactured origins, but their massive commercial success. While the Beatles had struggled for years in Hamburg clubs and Liverpool venues, the Monkees achieved instant fame through what Lennon called corporate songwriting and studio musicians doing all the real work. In 1967, Lennon sarcastically told a British journalist that they weren't in it for the money, they were in it for the music. He was clearly mocking the Monkees' situation when he added that some people are in it for the television ratings. The rivalry got worse when the Monkees outsold Beatles albums in 1967, a fact that reportedly drove Lennon to distraction. At a London recording studio, witnesses said he ranted about plastic bands making real musicians look like failures to accountants who don't understand art. Even after the Monkees proved their musical abilities on later albums, Lennon never forgave what he saw as their original sin of being created by television executives rather than growing organically through musical passion and struggle. Chuck Berry, the pioneer's dismissal. Chuck Berry, the rock and roll pioneer, was another musician whose alleged dismissal of the Beatles reportedly triggered John Lennon's deepest insecurities about legitimacy and musical credibility. The conflict between these two rock legends represented a painful clash between American originators and British interpreters. The tension began in the mid-1960s when Berry allegedly made dismissive comments about British bands copying American rock and roll without understanding its roots. According to music journalist Robert Christgau, Lennon took Berry's reported statement that these English boys play our music, but they don't live our lives as a personal attack on the Beatles' authenticity. What bothered Lennon most was Berry's apparent refusal to acknowledge the Beatles' innovation, so beyond imitation. While Lennon respected Berry as a founding father of rock, he reportedly resented what he saw as the pioneers' inability to recognize their evolution of his formula. John allegedly told people that Berry was stuck in the past, refusing to admit that students can surpass their teachers. In 1968, Lennon cryptically told a British journalist that some people think inventing something gives them ownership forever, but music belongs to everyone who can make it better. He was clearly referencing Berry's attitude toward British rock. The rivalry reached its peak during a 1972 concert where both performed. Witnesses said Berry cold-shouldered Lennon backstage, reportedly telling other musicians that he didn't need to shake hands with people who got rich playing his riffs. The slight devastated Lennon, who had idolized Barry since his teenage years. Despite publicly praising Barry's influence, Lennon never forgave what he saw as the pioneers' refusal to respect their artistic growth beyond simple imitation. Brian Wilson, the most shocking rivalry. Taking the top spot is the most shocking entry of all, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. Their innovative Pet Sounds album reportedly triggered John Lennon's deepest musical insecurities and competitive jealousy. The rivalry between these studio pioneers represented one of music's most complex creative competitions. The conflict began in 1966 when Pet Sounds was released to massive critical acclaim, directly inspiring the Beatles to create Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. According to Beatles producer George Martin, Lennon privately struggled with what he saw as Wilson's superior melodic gift. He reportedly told people that Brian was the one American who actually understood what they were trying to do, and he was doing it better. What made this feud particularly devastating was its roots in genuine artistic respect mixed with bitter envy. While Lennon acknowledged Wilson's genius, he reportedly resented that a surf music band was receiving critical praise for the same studio experimentation the Beatles had pioneered. John allegedly told studio engineers that Wilson was stealing their thunder with better arrangements. In 1967, Lennon cryptically told Melody Maker that some people think pretty harmonies make profound music, but there's a difference between craftsmanship and soul. He was clearly referencing the Beach Boys' acclaimed vocals. The rivalry got worse when Wilson's mental health struggles became public, while Lennon was also battling his own demons. Instead of finding sympathy, witnesses said Lennon viewed Wilson's breakdown as proof that Americans couldn't handle real artistic pressure like they could. This rivalry was particularly painful because it was based on genuine respect and fear. Lennon saw Wilson as a true threat to the Beatles' artistic supremacy, someone who could potentially outdo them at their own game. Unlike his other conflicts, which were often based on perceived lack of authenticity or talent, his issue with Wilson came from recognizing superior ability in someone he saw as competition. The legacy of Lennon's sharp tongue. These 6 conflicts reveal different aspects of John Lennon's complex personality and his uncompromising artistic stand. ARDS. Whether it was Mick Jagger's perceived fake rebellion, Elvis's commercial sellout, Paul McCartney's lightweight pop, the Monkees' manufactured origins, Chuck Berry's dismissive attitude, or Brian Wilson's superior talent, each conflict struck at something Lennon valued deeply. His brutal honesty about fellow musicians showed both his passion for authentic artistry and his deep insecurities about his own place in music history. While some saw his comments as refreshingly honest in an industry full of fake politeness, others viewed them as unnecessarily harsh and destructive. These conflicts shaped not only Lennon's relationships, but also influenced how he approached his own music. His constant battles with other artists revealed a man who was simultaneously confident in his abilities and terrified of being surpassed or dismissed. His sharp tongue became both his weapon and his weakness, creating enemies while also establishing his reputation as someone who wouldn't compromise his artistic vision for anyone. Whether his brutal honesty was refreshing or too harsh remains a matter of debate among music fans and historians. What's clear is that John Lennon's conflicts with these 6 musicians reveal the complex, contradictory nature of one of rock music's most influential and controversial figures.